Hello guys, and welcome back to Raising Reef. Today I'm going to be looking at calcium reactors and why they're my choice for replacing major elements in the reef aquarium. So when you first set up an aquarium, it's quite easy to replenish all of these major elements with water changes. Once you get some corals growing and you filling your tank up to make a nice display, your needs for these major elements are going to outweigh your ability to replace them with water changes. So you're going to need some addition. Quite often the next step to this would be a little bit of manual dosing. You might be adding kalkwasser or lime water to your auto top-up reservoir and dosing that in when you top up for evaporation, and this will be adding a little bit of those elements to replenish what's being taken up. If you are successful in the hobby and your corals continue to grow and your addiction to this hobby starts to get out of control and you're filling your tank to the brim with beautiful corals, you're going to find that this quickly becomes more demanding on the needs of these major elements than you can provide with those systems alone. At this point you'll need to jump to either dosing with a dosing pump, or you will need to fit a calcium reactor. I went straight from using kalkwasser in my auto top-up, where I was topping up only using kalk water until that wasn't enough, and then I was doing a little bit of manual dosing to top that up until the point where I needed a new solution. This is when I started using a calcium reactor. I think most people in the hobby would then start with a dosing unit. I was advised by somebody that a calcium reactor was the best option, and when I weighed it up I believed that to be so, and I still do today. Even though I have a relatively small system, most people would probably say, oh yeah, you could just set up a doser with some dosing solutions and the job's done. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. I can't think of a reason when I couldn't think of a scenario where I wouldn't be using a calcium reactor. With a calcium reactor, for anyone that may be new to them, they are a unit such as this, which you'd fill with dead coral skeletons, and we will inject CO2, which will reduce the pH of the water, and that will start to break these coral skeletons down into their base elements, and these elements will then flow through the reactor and then get put back into the tank. So essentially you're using old dead coral skeletons, melting them to provide everything needed for growing new coral skeletons. It's almost like the ultimate in recycling. So one of the good things about calcium reactors is that you concentrate on the alkalinity that it's replacing in the system. So if you need to replace 1 DKH a day of alkalinity, you can set up the flow through the reactor and the pH level within the reactor to accommodate the needs of your tank. Once you're providing the right amount of alkalinity, all of the other elements such as calcium will be falling in line with that, and they will balance themselves out. So whilst using a calcium reactor, I only really need to test my alkalinity to make sure this is working okay, and I know that the other elements that come along with that are going to sit in the right ratios, that they're being taken up by my corals. This for me is a much lower maintenance scenario than having to keep testing every element each week and making adjustments to each individual dosing pump to try and balance the system out. This will balance it for you based on the alkalinity. It's wise to test the other elements. I usually do this maybe once a month or once every other month out of interest, but I know by setting my alkalinity with this unit, my calcium should be getting taken care of. It also releases a lot of other trace elements that are locked up within the coral skeletons themselves, and this will also be replacing those into the system along with the major elements. So in order to inject CO2 into this unit, in order to break down the coral skeletons, you will need a supply of CO2. My favoured supply of CO2 comes in the form of a CO2 fire extinguisher with a solenoid and regulator attached to the front. This allows you to adjust the flow coming out of the canister so that you can get just the right amount of CO2 into the unit to create the right pH to melt the media. You don't want too much, because if you're injecting too much CO2 you could drive that pH too low and the media could melt too quickly. This can make it become slushy and it will just get clogged up and a bit disgusting inside, and if you don't put enough in, you won't be able to drive that pH down low enough in order to melt the media to start with. So it's a balancing act. Quite often, to make your life easier, you can run a calcium reactor with just the elements you see in front of you here, feeding the calcium reactor with that. This has its own pump that circulates the water within the reactor. I've always teed off of my return pump to feed my reactor, so it's pushing water through it. You've got an inline and an outline. This particular unit is a recirculating one, so any of the gas that collects at the top gets drawn back out and pushed back around the system. This is the most effective way, or the most efficient way, of recirculating CO2 and not using as much. You can run it like this. It's a little bit harder to set up if you do, but if you want an easier life, you'll have to invest in something called a pH controller. There's a little port on the top of the unit which allows you to feed a pH probe into the canister, and this will allow you to measure the pH of the water within the unit so that you can set it at the appropriate amount. What you'll do is use the controller to set, say, I want a pH of 6.5, and the controller will be connected to the solenoid on the regulator, and this will turn the gas on and off according to what level your pH is at. When the pH drops down, when the pH starts to rise up and gets to a certain set point, that will turn the gas on and start filling the reactor back up to bring that pH back down. Once the pH hits its desired level, it will switch the gas off and then just recirculate the gas inside until it's used up, and then that pH starts to rise again. It's a simple process. It's easily the simplest way to replenish major elements in your system. All you have to do is check the flow coming out of your reactor. Usually this is done as a drip rate. You can also monitor the bubbles of CO2 going in, and then you can get a good idea of how much gas is required according to the drip rate coming out. It takes a little while to dial one of these in precisely, and it usually takes you about a week to 2 weeks of making a small adjustment to the unit, leaving it 24 hours, and then testing your water. When your water level, when the alkalinity in the water remains stable, you know that the unit is dialed in, and you pretty much don't have to do anything else other than make sure that you check to see when your CO2 canister has run out, and just every once a day I usually check my effluent tube to see that the drip rate is coming out as expected. On top of this, I test my alkalinity once a week, unless I'm making any changes to the unit, and then I will do it a little bit more often. And that's it. Calcium reactors are a simple and effective way of replacing major elements, and I think that they are the complete solution. And as I said, I would always choose a calcium reactor to replace major elements in my reef aquarium. A little point about the regulators that come with the units. These can be sourced from a lot of different places. Some are good, some are not so good. At the end of the day, you want a good quality one, as it's dealing with pressurized gas, and we don't want to be messing around with inferior equipment. So it's good to pick up a decent regulator. These aren't the cheapest pieces of equipment. I think the cheapest good one that I found is about £50. Anything you buy cheaper than that is likely to be a little bit inferior, but you make the choice for yourself. The fitting that fits to a UK standard fire extinguisher screw thread is a DIN 477 screw thread. There are a few different regulators that come with a few different sizes, and you'll want to check out to make sure that the one you're buying will fit the canister that you want to put it on. Some canisters you can buy specifically for CO2 for the use with aquariums. These tend to come with a smaller fitting, and they tend to be a lot smaller in size. So they hold less gas and they will need to be refilled regularly. I find that picking up second-hand or old CO2 canisters are reasonably cheap, and easily sourced. I know a guy who fits fire extinguishers for a living, and I just give him a call and I pick these up for about £7 a piece, and I usually use about 2 a year. Media for the reactor, you can either buy specific media that's been designed to be used with a calcium reactor, or you can buy yourself a big sack of crushed coral that may be suitable, the sort of thing that people would use in the bottom of a reef tank if they wanted a big chunky substrate. This stuff is perfectly reasonable to use in a calcium reactor, and this is what I use. So that's about it really. It's a simple piece of equipment that, if set up correctly and taken the time to dial in properly, will give you long, sustainable replenishment of your major elements and contribute to a much more stable system. So I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to say today in this video. It's an overview of the basic elements that you need in order to run a calcium reactor and what its function is. If you have any additional questions about setting up a calcium reactor, you can drop those in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer any of those and give you any additional information that you may need. This particular unit is a C120 by Bubble Majors, and I've picked this up to go onto my new tank build system, and I'm looking forward to using this. I was previously using a TMC V2600. The difference between these two mainly is that this is a recirculating reactor, which means it draws the excess CO2 that collects at the top of the chamber back into the system and recirculates it to be more efficient. We'll see how we get on with that when I do the tank build and I install it on the system. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and you've got a little bit of a better understanding about a calcium reactor and how it might work for you. Give this video a like if you found it useful. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and you want to check out more videos just like this one. Take it easy guys, and I'll see you in the next video.